Text 13, second chapter. Dehinosmin yata dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tata dehantara praptis dhiras tatra namuyati. Dehina of the embodied asmin in this, yata as, dehe in the body, kaumaram boyhood, yauvanam youth, jara old age, yatha tata similarly, dehantara of transference of the body, prapti achievement, dhira the sober, tatra thereupon, na never, muyati is deluded. Translation: as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Purport: since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering, according to one's work in life. So, Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least in the heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment of material existence. So, in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the super soul and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the supreme cleavable or changeable, against the principle of the supreme souls being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the supreme exist eternally sanatana and are called kshara, that is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual souls remain the same fragmental. But once liberated, he lives in an eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the super soul, who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the fourth chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then the relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by the illusory energy Maya, then there is no need of one being the instructor and the other instructed. Such instruction would be useless because in the clutches of Maya, no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity. Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul, deluded, superior in position to the living entity Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul deluded by Maya. Text 14. Matra sparshastu konteya shitoshna sukha dukkada agama paino nityastam satikshasya bharata. Matra sparsha, sensory perception. Tu, only Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, Shita, winter, Ushna, summer, Sukha, happiness, Dukha, and pain. Dha, giving, Agama, appearing, Apayina, disappearing, Anitya, non-permanent, Tan, all of them, Titikshava, just try to tolerate, Bharata, O descendant of Bharata dynasty. Translation: O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Purport: In the proper discharge of duty, one has to learn to tolerate non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. According to Vedic injunction, one has to take his bath early in the morning, even during the month of Magha, January, February. It is very cold at that time, but in spite of that, a man who abides by the religious principles does not hesitate to take his bath. Similarly, a woman does not hesitate to cook in the kitchen in the months of May and June, the hottest part of the summer season. One has to execute his duty in spite of climatic inconveniences. Similarly, to fight is the religious principle of the Kshatriyas, and although one has to fight with some friend or relative, one should not deviate from his prescribed duty. One has to follow the prescribed rules and regulations of the religious principles in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge, because by knowledge and devotion only can one liberate himself from the clutches of Maya illusion. The two different names of address given to Arjuna are also significant. To address him as Kaunteya signifies his great blood relations from his mother's side, and to address him as Bharata signifies his greatness from his father's side. From both sides, he is supposed to have a great heritage. A great heritage brings responsibility in the matter of proper discharge of duties. Therefore, he cannot avoid fighting. Text 15. यम हीना व्यत्यंत एते पुरुषम पुरुषर्षभा समदुःख सुखम धीरम सोमृतत्वाय कल्पते. Yam, to one to whom he certainly na never vyatayanti are distressing. Ete, all this, purusham, to a person, purusharshava, O best among men, sama, unaltered, dukkha, in distress, sukham, and happiness, dhiram, patient, saha, he, amritatvaya, for liberation, kalpate, is considered eligible. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. Purport. Anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In the Varnashram institution, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order sannyas, is painstaking situation. But one who is serious about making his life perfect surely adopts the sannyas order of life in spite of all difficulties. The difficulties usually arise from having to severe family relationships to give up the connection of wife and children. But if anyone is able to tolerate such difficulties, surely his path to spiritual realization is complete. Similarly, in Arjuna's discharge of duties as a Kshatriya, he is advised to persevere even if it is difficult to fight with his family members or similarly beloved persons. Lord Chaitanya took sannyas at the age of 24 and his dependents, young wife as well as old mother, had no one else to look after them. Yet for a higher cause he took sannyas and was steady in the discharge of higher duties. That is the way of achieving liberation from the material bondage. Text 16. Nashato vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate satah bhayor abhidrishtvantas tvanayo sattvadarshibhi. Na, never, asata, of the non-existent, vidyate, there is, bhava, endurance. Na, never, abhava, changing quality, vidyate, there is, satah, of the eternal, ubayo, of the two, api, verily, drishta, observed, anta, conclusion, tu, indeed, anayo, of them, tattva, of the truth, darshibi, by the seers. Translation. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existence, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal soul, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. Purport. There is no endurance of the changing body. That the body is changing every moment by the actions and reactions of the different cells is admitted by modern medical science, and thus growth and old age are taking place in the body. But the spirit soul exists permanently, remaining the same despite all changes of the body and the mind. That is the difference between matter and spirit. By nature, the body is ever changing and the soul is eternal. This conclusion is established by all classes of the seers of truth, both impersonalists and personalists. In the Vishnu Purana 2.12.38, it is stated that Vishnu and his abodes all have self-illuminated spiritual existence. Jyotim Shri Vishnur Bhuvanani Vishnu. The words existent and non-existent refer only to spirit and matter. That is the version of all seers of truth. This is the beginning of the instruction by the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. Removal of ignorance involves the re-establishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the part and parcel living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can understand the nature One can understand the nature of the Supreme by thorough study of oneself. The difference between oneself and the Supreme Being understood as the relationship between the part and the whole. In the Vedanta Sutras as well as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme has been accepted as the origin of all emanations. Such emanations are experienced by its superior and inferior natural consequences, superior and inferior natural sequences. The living entities belong to the superior nature as it will be revealed in the 7th chapter. Although there is no difference between the energy and the energetic is accepted as the supreme and the energy or nature is accepted as the subordinate. The living entities therefore are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of the master and the servant, or the teacher and the taught. Such clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance. And to drive away such ignorance, the Lord teaches the Bhagavad Gita for the enlightenment of all living entities for all time. Text 17. Avinashi tu tadviddhi yena sarvam idam tatam vinasham avyayasyasya nakaschit kartum arhati. Avinashi, imperishable, tu, but that viddhi, know it, yena, by whom, sarva, all of the body, idam, this, tatam, pervaded, vinasham, destruction, avyayasya, of the imperishable, asya, of it, nakaschit, no one, kartum, to do, arhati, is able. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. This verse more clearly explains the real nature of the soul, which is spread all over the body. Anyone can understand what is spread all over the body. It is consciousness. Everyone is conscious of the pains and pleasures of the body in part or as a whole. This spreading of consciousness is limited within one's own body. The pains and pleasures of one body are unknown to another. Therefore, each and every body is the embodiment of an individual soul, and the symptom of the soul's presence is perceived as individual consciousness. This soul is described as 1/10,000th part of the upper portion of the hair point in size. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad 5.9 confirms this. Bhalagra shatabhagasya shatadha kalpitasya cha bhago jiva savigneya sa chantyantya kalpate. When the upper point of the hair is divided into 100 parts, and again each of such parts is further divided into 100 parts, each part is the measurement of the dimension of the spirit soul. Similarly, the same version is stated. Keshagra shatabhagasya shatam shadrishatmaka jiva sukshma swarupoyam sankyatito hi chitkana. There are innumerable particles of spiritual atoms which are measured as 1/10,000th of the upper portion of the hair. Therefore, the individual particle of spirit soul is a spiritual atom smaller than the material atoms, and such atoms are innumerable. This very small spiritual spark is the basic principle of the material body, and the influence of such a spiritual spark is spread all over the body, as the influence of the active principle of some medicine spreads throughout the body. This current of the spirit soul is felt all over the body as consciousness, and that is the proof of the presence of the soul. Any layman can understand that the material body minus the consciousness is a dead body, and this consciousness cannot be revived in the body by any means of material administration. Therefore, consciousness is not due to any amount of material combination, but to the spirit soul. In the Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.9, the measurement of the atomic spirit soul is further explained. Yesho anuratma chetasa veditavyo yasmin prana panchada samvishvesha pranais chittam sarvam otam prajanam yasmin vishuddhe vibhavati yesha atma. The soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is floating in the 5 kinds of air: prana, apana, vyana, samana and udana. It is situated within the heart and spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities. When the soul is purified from the contamination of the 5 kinds of material air, its spiritual effulgence is exhibited. The Hatha Yoga system is meant for controlling the 5 kinds of air encircling the pure soul by different kinds of sitting postures, not for any material profit, but for liberation of the minute soul from the entanglement of the material atmosphere. So the constitution of the atomic soul is admitted in all Vedic literatures, and it is also actually felt in the practical experience of any sane man. Only the insane man can think of this atomic soul as all-pervading Vishnu Tattva. The influence of the atomic soul can be spread all over a particular body. According to the Mundaka Upanishad, this atomic soul is situated in the heart of every living entity. And because the measurement of the atomic soul is beyond the power of appreciation of the material scientists, some of them assert foolishly that there is no soul. The individual atomic soul is definitely there in the heart along with the super soul, and thus all the energies of the bodily movement are emanating from this part of the body. The corpuscles which carry the oxygen from the lungs gather energy from the soul. When the soul passes away from this position, the activity of the blood generating fusion ceases. Medical science accepts the importance of the red corpuscles, but it cannot ascertain the source of the energy is the soul. Medical science, however, does admit that the heart is the seat of all energies of the body. Such atomic particles of the spirit whole are compared to the sunshine molecules. In the sunshine, there are innumerable radiant molecules. Similarly, the fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord are atomic sparks of the rays of the Supreme Lord, called by the name Prabha or superior energy. So whether one follows Vedic knowledge or modern science, one cannot deny the existence of the spirit soul in the body. And the science of the soul is explicitly described in the Bhagavad Gita by the personality of Godhead himself. Text 18. ಅಂತವಂತ ಇಮೆ ದೇಹ ನಿತ್ಯಸ್ಯುಕ್ತ ಶರೀರಿಣ ಅನಾಶಿನು ಅಪ್ರಮೇಯಸ್ಯ ತಸ್ಮಾದ್ ಯುದ್ಧಸ್ಯ ಭಾರತ. Antavanta perishable, ime all this deha material bodies, nityasya eternal in existence, ukta or said, sharirina of the embodied soul, anashina never to be destroyed, aprameyasya immeasurable, tasmat therefore, yudhyasya fight, bharata or descendant of Bharata. Translation: the material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, living and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore, fight, O descendant of Bharata. Purport: the material body is perishable by nature. It may perish immediately or it may do so after 100 years. It is a question of time only. There is no chance of maintaining it indefinitely. But the spirit soul is so minute that it cannot even be seen by an enemy, to say nothing of being killed. As mentioned in the previous verse, it is so small that no one can have any idea how to measure its dimension. So from both viewpoints, there is no cause of lamentation, because the living entity, as he is not killed, nor can the material body be saved from any length of time or permanently protected. The minute particle of the whole spirit acquires his material body according to his work, and therefore observance of religious principles should be utilized. In the Vedanta Sutras, living entity is qualified as light because he is part and parcel of the supreme light. As sunlight maintains the entire universe, so the light of the soul maintains his material body. As soon as the spirit soul is out of this material body, the body begins to decompose. Therefore, the spirit soul which therefore it is the spirit soul which maintains the body. The body itself is unimportant. Arjuna was advised to fight and not sacrifice the cause of religion for material bodily considerations. Text 19. Ya enam vetti hantaram yaschainam manyate hatam ubhautau na vijanito nayam hanti na hanyate. Ya anyone who enam this vetti knows hantaram the killer, ya anyone who cha also enam this manyate thinks hatam killed ubhau both tau they na never vijanita or in knowledge na never I am this hanti kills na nor hanyate is killed. Translation: neither he who thinks the living entity the slayer, nor he who thinks it is slain is in knowledge, for the self slays not, nor is it slain. Purport: when an embodied living entity is hurt by fatal weapons, it is to be known that the living entity within the body is not killed. The spirit soul is so small that it is impossible to kill him by any material weapon, as will be evident from subsequent verses. Nor is the living entity killable because of a spiritual constitution. What is killed or is supposed to be killed is the body only. This, however, does not at all encourage killing of the body. The Vedic injunction is Ma himsya sarva bhutani. Never commit violence to anyone. Nor does understanding that the living entity is not killed encourage animal slaughter. Animal killing the body of anyone without authority is abominable and is punishable by the law of the state as well as by the law of the Lord. Arjuna, however, is being engaged in killing for the principle of religion and not whimsically. Text 20. Na jayate maryate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuya ajo nitya shashvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. Na never, jayate takes birth, mriyate dies, va either, kadachit at any time, past, present or future, na never, I am this bhutva, having coming to being, bhavita will come to be, va or not, bhuya or is again coming to be, aja unborn, nitya eternal, shashwata permanent, I am this purana, the oldest, na never, hanyate is killed, hanyamane being killed, sharire the body. Translation: for the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Purport: qualitatively, the small atomic fragmental part of the Supreme Spirit is one with the Supreme. It undergoes no changes like the body. Sometimes the soul is called steady or kutastha. The body is subject to such kinds of transformations. It takes its birth from the womb of the mother's body, remains for some time, grows, reproduces. Some effects gradually dwindles and at last vanquishes into oblivion. The soul, however, does not go through such changes. The soul is not born, but because it takes on a material body, the body takes its birth. The soul does not take birth there, and the soul does not die. Anything which has birth also has death, and and because the soul has no birth, he therefore has no past, present, or future. He is eternal, ever existing, and primeval. That is, there is no trace in history of his coming into being. Under the impression of the body, we seek the history of birth, etc. of the soul. The soul does not at any time become old as the body does. So-called old man therefore feels himself to be in the same spirit as is in his childhood or youth. The changes of the body do not affect the soul. The soul does not deteriorate like a tree nor anything material. The soul has no byproduct either. The byproducts of the body, namely children, are also different individual souls, and owing to the body, they appear as children of a particular man. The body develops because of the soul's presence, but the soul has neither offshoots nor change. Therefore, the soul is free from the six changes of the body. In the Katha Upanishad, in the Katha Upanishad, we also find a similar passage which reads, "Na jayate mriyate va vipaschin nayam kutaschin na bhuva na bhabhuva kaschit ajo nitya shashvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire." The meaning and purport of this verse is the same as in the Bhagavad Gita, but here in this verse there is one special word, vipaschit, which means learned or with knowledge. The soul is full of knowledge or full always with consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is a symptom of the soul. Even if one does not find the soul within the heart there where he is situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to clouds, nor or for some other reason, but the light of the sun is always there, and we are convinced that it is therefore daytime. As soon as there is a little light in the sky early in the morning, we can understand that the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. This consciousness of the soul is, however, different from the consciousness of the Supreme, because the Supreme consciousness is all knowledge, past, present, and future. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna. I'll read again. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna. But Krishna is not like the forgetful soul. If so, Krishna's teachings of the Bhagavad Gita would be useless. The two kinds of soul, namely the minute particle soul, Anu Atma, and the super soul, Vibhu Atma. This is also confirmed in the Katha Upanishad 1-20 in this way. Anuraniyan mahato mahiyan atma syajantor nihito guhayam tamakar tam akratu pashyati vita shoko dhatu prasadan mahimanam atmana. Both the super soul, Paramatma, and the Atmic soul, Jivatma, are situated on the same tree of the body, within the same heart of the living being, and only one who has become free from all material desires as well as lamentations can, by the grace of the Supreme, understand the glories of the soul. Krishna is the fountainhead of the super soul also, as it will be disclosed in the following chapters. And Arjuna is the atomic soul, forgetful of his real nature. Therefore, he requires to be enlightened by Krishna or by his bona fide representative, the spiritual master. Text 21. Veda vinashinam nityam ya enam ajam avyayam katam sa purusha partha kam ghatayati hantikam. Veda knows avinashinam, indestructible, nityam, always existing, ya, one who, enam, this soul, ajam, unborn, avyayam, immutable, katam, how, sa, that, purusha, the person, partha, O partha, Arjuna, kam, whom, ghatayati, causes to hurt, hanti, kills, kam, who. Translation: O Partha, how can a person who knows that the soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? Purport: everything has its proper utility, and a man who is situated in complete knowledge knows how and where to apply a thing for its proper utility. Similarly, violence also has its utility, and how to apply violence rests with the person in knowledge. Although the justice of the peace awards capital punishment to a person condemned for murder, the justice of the peace cannot be blamed because he orders violence to another person according to the courts of justice. In Manu Samhita, the law book for mankind, it is supported that a murderer should be condemned to death so that in his next life he will not have to suffer for the great sin he has committed. Therefore, the king's punishment of hanging a murderer is actually beneficial. Similarly, when Krishna orders fighting, it must be concluded that violence is for supreme justice, and thus Arjuna should follow the instruction, knowing well that such violence committed in the act of fighting for Krishna is not violence at all, because at any rate the man, or rather the soul, cannot be killed. So, for the administration of justice, so called violence is permitted. A surgical operation is not meant to kill the patient but to cure him. Therefore, the fighting to be executed by Arjuna at the instruction of Krishna is with full knowledge, so there is no possibility of sinful reaction. Text 22. Vasamshi jirnani yata vihaya navani granati naroparani tata sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. Vashamsi, garments, jirnani, old and worn out, yata, just as, vihaya, giving up, navani, new garments, grihnati, does accept, nara, a man, aparani, others, tata, in the same way, sharirani, bodies, vihaya, giving up, jirnani, old and useless, anyani, different, samyati, verily accepts, navani, new sets, dehi, the embodied. Translation: as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. Purport: change of body by the atomic individual soul is an accepted fact. Even the modern scientists who do not believe in the existence of the soul but at the same time cannot explain the source of energy from the heart have to accept continuous changes of body which appear from childhood to boyhood and from boyhood to youth and again from youth to old age. From old age, the change is transferred to another body. This has already been explained in a previous verse 213. Transference of the atomic individual soul to another body is made possible by the grace of the super soul. The super soul fulfills the desire of the atomic soul as one friend fulfills the desire of another. The Vedas, like the Mundaka Upanishad as well as the Shvetashvara Upanishad, compare the soul and the super soul to two friendly birds sitting on the same tree. One of the birds, the individual atomic soul, is eating the fruit of the tree, and the other bird, Krishna, is simply watching his friend. Of these two birds, although they are the same in quality, one is captivated by the fruits of the material tree, while the other is simply witnessing the activities of his friend. Krishna is the witnessing bird, and Arjuna is the eating bird. Although they are friends, one is still the master and other is the servant. Forgetfulness of his relationship by the atomic soul is simply the cause of one's changing his position from one tree to another or from one body to another. The the Jiva soul is struggling very hard on the tree of the material body, but as soon as he agrees to accept the other bird as the supreme spiritual master, as Arjuna agreed to do by voluntary surrender unto Krishna for instruction, the subordinate bird immediately becomes free from all lamentations. Both the Mundaka Upanishad and Shvetashvara Upanishad confirm this. Samane vriksho purusho nimagno anishaya shochati muyyamana dushtam yada pashyati anyamisham asya mahimanamiti vitashoka. Although the two birds are in the same tree, the eating bird is fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness as the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way or other he turns his face towards his friend, the Supreme, the Lord, and knows his glories, at once the suffering bird becomes free from all anxieties. Arjuna has now turned his face towards his eternal friend Krishna and is understanding the Bhagavad Gita from him. And thus, hearing from Krishna, he can understand the supreme glories of the Lord and be free from lamentation. Arjuna is advised herewith by the Lord not to lament for the bodily change of his grandfather and his teacher. He should rather be happy to kill their bodies in the righteous fight so that they may be cleansed at once of all reactions from the various bodily activities. One who lays down his life on the sacrificial altar or in the proper battlefield is at once cleansed of bodily reactions and promoted to a higher status of life. So there was no cause for Arjuna's lamentation. Text 23. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dhati pavaka, na chainam klediyantyapo, na shoshayati maruta. Na never enam this, the soul chindanti can cut two pieces shastrani weapons. Na never enam this soul, dhati burns, pavaka fire. Na never cha also enam this soul, kledyanti moistens, apaha water. Na never shoshayati dries, maruta wind. Translation: the soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. Purport: all kinds of weapons, swords, flame weapons, rain weapons, tornado weapons, etc., are unable to kill the spirit soul. It appears that there are many kinds of weapons made of earth, water, fire, earth, water, air, ether, etc., in addition to the modern weapons of fire. Even the nuclear weapons of the modern age are classified as fire weapons. But formerly there were other weapons made of all different types of material elements. Fire weapons were counteracted by water weapons, which are now unknown to modern science. Nor do modern scientists have knowledge of tornado weapons. Nonetheless, the soul can never be cut into pieces nor annihilated by any number of weapons, regardless of scientific devices. The Mayavadi cannot explain how the individual soul came into existence simply by ignorance and consequently became covered by the illusory energy, nor was it ever possible to cut the individual souls from the original Supreme Soul. Rather, the individual souls are eternally separated parts of the Supreme Soul. Because they are atomic individual souls, eternally Sanatana, they are prone to be covered by the illusory energy, and thus they become separated from the association of the Supreme Lord. Just as sparks of a fire, although one in quality with the fire, are prone to be extinguished when out of the fire. In the Varaha Purana, the living entities are described as separated parts and parcels of the Supreme. They are eternally so according to the Bhagavad Gita also. So, even after being liberated from illusion, the living entity remains a separate identity, as is evident from the teachings of the Lord to Arjuna. Arjuna became liberated by the knowledge received from Krishna, but he never became one with Krishna. Text 24. Achedyoyam adhayoyam akledyo shoshevacha nitya sarvagata stanur achaloyam sanatana. Achedya, unbreakable. I am this soul. Adhaya, unable to be burned. I am this soul. Akledya, insoluble. Ashoshya, not able to be dried. Eva, certainly. Cha, and Nitya, everlasting. Sarvagata, all pervading. Sthanu, unchangeable. Achala, immovable. I am this soul. Sanatana, eternally the same. Translation: this individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can neither be burned nor dried. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Purport: all these qualifications of the atomic soul definitely prove that the individual soul is eternally the atomic particle of the spirit whole, and he remains the same he remains the same atom eternally without change. The theory of monism is very difficult to apply in this case because the individual soul is never expected to become one homogeneously. After liberation from material's contamination, the atomic soul may prefer to remain as a spiritual spark in the effulgent rays of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the intelligent souls enter into the spiritual planets to associate with the Personality of Godhead. The word Sarvagata, all pervading, is significant because there is no doubt that the living entities are all over God's creation. They live on the land, in the water, in the air, within the earth, and even within fire. The belief that they are sterilized in fire is not acceptable because it is clearly stated here that the soul cannot be burned by fire. Therefore, there is no doubt that there are living entities also in the sun planet with suitable bodies to live there. If the sun globe is uninhabited, then the word Sarvagata, living everywhere, becomes meaningless.